Hello and welcome back to Ask Your Pharmacist, where we're shining a light on the work being done at the UK's pharmacies and the big difference they can make to all our lives, our health and our well-being. This series focuses on what you can and should approach your local pharmacist about. I'm Mike Young and our expert Suki Basra is alongside me, someone who's been working as a pharmacist for 3 decades, based in central London. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the common treatments there are that a pharmacist might give you, and a little bit more we'll talk about how those treatments actually work. The most common medications then, what's the number one that you're handing out at your central London pharmacy?
I would say it would be paracetamol, simple paracetamol, so painkillers, antihistamines, analgesics, so I would say ibuprofen, and cough medicines I think are quite common.
I think all of those I could have maybe predicted. What I think very often happens though is somebody comes along and they don't know really what sort of medication they should maybe be asking for. And of course, this is where they can lean on you. If we kind of break those down, the painkillers, the paracetamols, that's a go-to for what? You're giving that, yes, for pain, but bringing down a fever, for example.
Yes, I would say that I would give somebody paracetamol for bringing down temperature, or ibuprofen. But again, as a pharmacist, I would want to make that assessment, because if, for example, someone was asthmatic and I questioned them, do you have any other conditions? Ibuprofen may not necessarily be appropriate for them because it can trigger a wheeze in some patients. They may be on other medication that, again, ibuprofen's not appropriate for. They may be on blood thinners. There are a whole manner of things that would mean that you need to be really careful when you just buy even the simple elements. And even paracetamol, it's making sure that that individual's not taking another painkiller that they didn't even realise also had paracetamol in it. So it's just making sure that you're safety netting your patients all the time and making sure they know why they're taking it. Back pains, temperature, aching muscles, the simple things. But if they're coming in quite often, that's where your community pharmacist comes in quite useful.
Yes.
They've watched that patient come in, week week out for those painkillers. You start to then build a picture and you start remembering, you think, okay, this has been going on for way too long. Do you think that we maybe want to reconsider that there might be something else you might be masking? And that's a conversation I have quite often. It's not necessarily saying you've done something wrong, but is there a possibility that you might be masking something more serious? And then that dialogue starts because that individual trusts you and you may be picking out something that might be more sinister or more serious, which they may have not even bothered to think about.
The antihistamine will be a common one for a whole range of different allergies, for example. When should somebody be reaching out to you for an antihistamine in their life?
So if they've had sort of a heat rash, or they've had an allergic reaction to something, or they're not even quite sure, they've just got some sort of allergy, hay fever type symptoms, so they've got itchy eyes or they're sneezing. Antihistamines work at that time when the body is responding to something it's not quite sure about. It's releasing histamine in the body as a natural protective measure. So the rash is basically the histamines coming to the surface of the skin because they've touched something or come into contact. It's protecting the layer of the skin. Histamines are being released in the nose and the eyes because it's protecting what your eyes are coming into contact, whether it be pollen or anything like that. So it's just the body's own way of trying to protect itself. And the antihistamine is just trying to calm that down. Now again, if that's happening and your antihistamine's not working and you're coming back and forth, your pharmacist is there to pick up on that and just think, okay, let's reassess this. Is it something else? So there's lots of ways that we sort of come into the journey of the patient's condition at the beginning, in the middle, and even towards the end where they may need to be nudged into the right direction.
I think you and I have lived through perhaps our first major pandemic in recent memory. I hope that that's raised a lot of people's understanding about at least what some medications do. I speak now about antibiotics because, of course, many people might have been thinking antibiotics will be the answer to the COVID pandemic, and of course they weren't.
That's right, yeah. I think we need to, as a general public, we need to understand the importance of antibiotics and why over-prescribing antibiotics make it difficult for when we genuinely need it. You know, bacteria and viruses are things that are very clever. They are constantly mutating. They are microbes that can evolve much quicker than perhaps we can even understand. And that's how COVID has come about. And thinking that they are all the same thing and that the answer is antibiotics hasn't been the right way to deal with this. And I think the COVID pandemic has allowed us to have that dialogue and explain to our patients and our communities that the amoxicillin or the penicillin isn't the answer to everything, and actually savour it for the moment when it genuinely will make a difference. Because if we all start taking these like Smarties, there'll be a time where none of it will work because that same bacteria will have developed a way to get around it. And that's the element of thinking about where antimicrobial stewardship comes in. Being more mindful about whether you need an antibiotic or not. Your body is quite clever and it can overcome a majority of these things, but let's keep it for when we can't overcome it or when we're quite vulnerable. So there are elements of within our community, people that are much more vulnerable, and they're the ones that perhaps these antibiotics are much more useful for. We are strong, our children are strong, they need to be exposed to these bacteria, get the coughs and colds at school. There's nothing wrong with them getting that, as long as, again, I go back to hydration. If a child is well hydrated and they have a temperature, their body is killing that bacteria. But if they're hydrated, they'll be able to overcome it because they will lose that heat. They need that heat to kill that virus in their body, but they need water to retain themselves and keep healthy. So these are things that perhaps historically we've sort of lost our education on, and they need to be reminded. And then we become much more mindful and we're much more empowered about our own health.
What do you do as a pharmacist? What do pharmacists do up and down the UK to stay fully up to date on the latest medical conditions there are? Because as you say, these things evolve and mutate, but also the latest treatments.
So as a profession, we are guided under the General Pharmaceutical Council, where every pharmacist has to provide evidence that they are educating themselves on the latest treatments or they are upgrading their competencies. If they find a gap in their knowledge, what evidence have you demonstrated that you've made sure that you're covering that gap? It's a moral duty, it's a moral code of conduct that we all abide to in the same way a general practice, a doctor would do the same. We have our own moral conduct and we are accountable to that. And we are registered clinicians, so we are all on a medical, a general pharmacy register, and we have a number that's like your GMC number. So we have a professional duty to maintain that, and so we have to provide the evidence in order to be registered for the following year. And I don't think the general public recognise that is something that we are actually obliged to do, and we have to do it. It is a necessity.
And I think what's fascinating is, as a father of two little ones, I don't think I've been in a pharmacy more in recent years than at that point. So that's when we really needed you. So we're all grateful for that level of expertise and knowledge that we could turn to. Thank you for now, Suki. We've covered some of the treatments, but what about how to stay well in the first place? That's coming up in our next episode. Ask Your Pharmacist is a Broadcast Revolution production for the National Pharmacy Association.